Hello, Paul Kirpal.
Mike, how you doing?
Paul, you were very nervous before we started this. You just got to loosen yourself up, make yourself nice and easy here. Okay?
Yes.
This is the Mike Roach podcast, baby. Conversation, everything is smooth, everything is good to go. But thanks for taking the time to do this.
Thank you for having me on your podcast, Mike. I appreciate it.
So tell me, Paul, you are the president and CEO of AMO Sports Consulting.
That's right. It's my own company.
Your own company.
Yes.
How long have you been running this company, Paul?
Well, I just established the company and put together all the things that I needed to bring it to the athletic arena. Mm-hmm. So I've been busy putting it together for the last year, and it's at that point now where it's ready to launch.
Okay, so Myoneural optimization.
Correct.
Please explain. Explain.
Okay. So the company's name is AMO Sports Consulting, and it stands for Athletic Myoneural Optimization. Myo stands for muscle. Neural has to do with the neurological system. So Athletic Myoneural Optimization has to do with just that.
What do you do exactly, Paul? You got to break that down for all of us.
Okay. All right. So I'm very proficient at understanding neuroscience and the muscular system. So what I do is I work with the brain and the body in terms of improving the signaling from the brain, the central nervous system, to the peripheral nervous system, which is the body. Mm-hmm. So what I do is when I work with people, I look at working with the problems that they present with. And that alone in therapy is a very hard thing sometimes to diagnose or assess with athletes or clients. And that's the challenge that a lot of athletes, I feel, are having is having a competent individual that can deliver a high-quality service. And that's what I have.
How did you get into it?
So it all started with my training years ago. 30 years ago, I was in a massage therapy program. It was a private vocational school at that time. Massage therapy today, you can go to the local college and you could do the program. Whereas back then in the 90s, mm-hmm. There were only 6 schools in Canada. So at that time, at that time, there weren't many students that were in the program, but it wasn't offered in a local college level. So at that time, the program was very extensive in terms of sciences, learning about physiology and things like this. So that's where my training started. My education involved neuroscience, neurophysiology, neurology, endocrinology, splanknology. That's just fancy for understanding how the organs work, glandular function, muscle function, bone function. Very heavy in the sciences, physiology. So that's where it all started.
Is there a certain reason, like, where'd the passion come from for you to want to get into this?
Well, you know what? When I was young, I always felt that people always came to me to help them out with things. So at that time, I was just an amateur. So they would ask me to massage, their neck, their shoulder, their back, and I didn't even realize it, but they were getting a lot of benefit out of it. That's how I decided to get into the profession. My high school guidance counselor showed me the application for massage therapy. It was very unconventional at the time. Mm-hmm. So instead of going into a college program that was local, I took a chance and I went into the private school sector. So from there, I have a natural love for science, especially human biology, science, and this sort of thing. So it was easy for me to get into it. So the program was very heavy. The course itself, it felt like it was in med school. Mm-hmm. Like that's how heavy the physiology was and the sciences were. So at that point, a lot of people didn't want to continue to learn with that. For me, I just continued to learn after that. So once I started there in terms of cutting my teeth with physiology, I just continued to learn. I'm a lifelong learner, so even today I still learn. And from there, I just finished the program, started my career, and then got into other sciences, so other specialties. Craniosacral therapy, which works with the brain, the cranium, right down to the sacrum and the spine, the skeletal system. And then from there, I got into acupuncture. So at that point, what happened was I did my training at the Shiatsu School of Canada downtown in Toronto. It is now the AIM school. So at that time, when I got into acupuncture, it was just amazing for me to understand that their science, their medical science, their theory, their Eastern medical theory has been around for 3,000 years.
3,000 years.
3,000 years. That's the science, that's the medical science that they use to treat people, patients.
That's a long time, Paul.
It's a long time ago, exactly. It's ancient, as a matter of fact. It's ancient.
So tell me the biggest difference between that and what we conventionally see.
So I guess what we can say is that, like with Western medicine,
Yes.
it's only been around for about 300 years. 3,000 years to 300 years, there's a huge difference when it comes to how the science has survived with acupuncture and in terms of how it works. Acupuncture itself has an abstract theory. So if you were to cut open your body, you can't see these meridians that they talk about. You can't see these acupuncture points. So in that sense, it's conceptual, right? But in it, they've created a science out of it, but they had amazing results. So these points correspond to internal organs, okay? So your heart, your lungs, your kidneys, your spleen, et cetera, et cetera. So these access points in the acupuncture points have treatment, healing qualities when you access them correctly. So in this, it was just intriguing to me that you can get results by accessing these points and helping the patient heal. You can get some very good results. So they took into mind, the body, the spirit, which to me is exactly what we need to understand the whole body. Not just like Western science, which they just might look at the physical portions of the body and then not include the other parts, the mind, the body, the spirit, all of it.
Now, I know you got a thing for sports, Paul.
Yeah, I love sports.
Wanting to work with athletes. Why athletes specifically? Why do you feel that this would make that great difference with the body and how they react and move?
Okay, so the work that I've done with my clients over the years, I've gotten phenomenal results with them in a very short period of time. So by applying the knowledge that I have and seeing the results that I was getting with everyday normal people, the next thing that came to my mind was, if I can apply this to athletes, how much more of an extraordinary effect could we get? They're already amazing at what they do. So if these athletes can perform at a higher level because of what it is that I can do, then the sky's the limit with what they can do with themselves.
What do you believe you can do specifically for the athletes?
Optimize their performance, maximize their potential. That's what my business is about. What I have is a distinguished skill at being able to understand the neuromuscular system. It's very complex, understanding neuroscience, how the brain works, what cortical contact points are. They're external contact points that have a deeper connection to the inside of the brain. To access this, have an influence on these points so that it can treat the individual, we can address things that are deep-rooted in emotions, injury, pain, lagging problems, unresolved problems, healing rates, okay? And also signal function. So just think about the brain and the body for a moment. The brain is the central nervous system. From there, when that action potential from your brain has to go to your body, okay, it has a certain speed. If the speed is slow, so goes the person's reflexes, reaction time. If we can speed this up, that improves their functionality, their reflexes, their strength, their performance. So that's how I came up with it in terms of being able to say, I want to bring this to the athletic arena so that I can show the world what I can do.
Now, you're talking about speeding it up. So if you want to get them to really optimize their skill, you got to be able to speed it up at a very high rate. Or does it have to be at a small rate, right? Because when you look at, say, a 100-meter runner, right?
Yes.
A tenth of a second makes a difference.
That's right.
Right? 0.2 of a second makes a massive difference. It's the difference between winning and losing here, Paul.
Yeah.
So are you talking about a big difference it will make when it takes that jump, or that small difference that makes that key difference, you know?
It's split seconds. Split seconds. But what it really comes down to is how fast the response rate is once that action potential gets down to the tissues. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Let's say an athlete has an injury.
Mm-hmm.
That injury creates hesitation. That hesitation is enough to either make a play or break a play. Okay? So if there is less pain, less dysfunction that is happening, if the signal process is going from the brain to the tissues in a competent manner where the athlete feels confident with what they can do, they can perform at a different level. They're not preoccupied with the thought process of what to do. They just do it instinctively, reactively. But if you have pain in your knee, in your ankle, in your back, and you can't move as freely as you'd like, that's going to impact whether you can make that play or not. And we see it all the time. Split seconds make a difference between whether someone can block a shot or make a shot, all right? If they can actually beat their guy or if they get beaten.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking split seconds, but what happens is that as time goes on, as the optimization improves in the athlete, what happens is that it improves everything else overall. It's just like a watch when it gets tuned. Right?
So does it has to begin in the brain.
Absolutely.
It has to begin in the brain.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
But is that just mostly a confidence thing?
Well, they're all tied together, right? So let's say, for example, an athlete has no injury. Mm-hmm. They don't have any issues such as mental health issues. They don't have any surgical rehabilitation they're going through. Then what happens is that athlete really doesn't have anything that's holding them back. So their confidence levels are going to be there. But talk to an athlete that does have an injury or is recovering from an injury or is going through mental health issues or is struggling with other external factors such as, life issues, right? That's going to have an impact.
Okay, let me give you an example.
Okay.
Ben Simmons.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you see a guy like Ben Simmons. Now, he has a back injury. It's got to be pretty damn bad. We haven't seen this guy play in probably most of his career at this point.
Yep.
Is there anything you would have done differently with a guy like him?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because when you're giving your examples, right, is that a good person to bring up or
That's
talk
a good
about?
one.
Okay.
That's
so
a good one.
A guy like Ben Simmons, right? Now, he's an extreme case,
Yep.
I will say.
Yep.
But how would you have handled a guy like him? Because even before he was out with that back injury, right? Like he's been completely out now. We haven't seen this guy since God knows when. But even before, you saw with the way that he played, his confidence is just completely shot. He did not want to shoot the ball.
Yep.
He didn't even look at the rim.
Yep.
At certain points, you would see him at the basket, doesn't want to explode for a dunk. He would just pass it out and run away like he's afraid, and which is sad to see because a lot of people who have watched him and saw his game know how capable and how good a guy like Ben Simmons is. So let's say you had a guy like him as a client, right? How would you have handled an injury with Ben Simmons differently? What would you do?
So the first thing is the surgical intervention that he had, that's a huge problem.
The surgery, the back surgery.
Well, he had the surgery, but he had the epidurals. His agent is from Toronto. You know that, right?
I do.
Bernie Lee,
Mhm.
right? Well, if Bernie Lee does see the podcast, so hopefully he can give me a call. But there's things that I can do to help a guy like Ben. Okay? So the first thing is to understand the problem at hand. Back problems can be very difficult to diagnose and assess. Okay? Now, with that, the number one reason that people have low back issues, I would say, has to do with how the adrenal gland portion is working in the back. It sits on top of the kidneys. When this area pushes out a lot of cortisol, adrenaline, it starts to break down the area in terms of its signaling function, but also its strength capacity. So think about high stress for a moment. Think about the pressure that he might have been under at that time that was not addressed the way that it should be. What I would do is come in there and stabilize how this adrenaline and the cortisol is actually working in that area. So when you have this constantly present with a person, they will start to have issues with their back, stamina issues, durability issues. And when this happens and you're jumping, you're playing, you're running at a very high level, it won't take long before your body starts to say, I can't do it anymore. And when that happens, you see the consequences of this with Ben, right?
Mm-hmm.
His back injuries were compounded by probably just playing. And Mike, when an injury happens, we look at it from a sports perspective and say, well, what happened on film, right?
Yeah.
A lot of these injuries happen in practice or when they're at home or what we won't see. And so they won't even disclose it.
And it's funny you mentioned that because I was going to say that a lot of people, when they see Ben Simmons, they question, is he really injured or not, right?
Yeah.
And you know this because you work in this. I don't think a guy's just going to be sitting out this long if he can play. Like Ben Simmons, we're talking about a back injury here.
Yeah.
Have you seen back injuries?
Oh, lots of them. I've treated lots of them over the years, successfully as well.
And you would say probably one of the worst injuries you can have, or
what Ben has?
Not necessarily what Ben has, but just in the back, period.
Well, you see, that's the thing. There's so many different dimensions to look at for back injuries. I'm just giving you an example of one of the things that I would look at for Ben. That would be one of them. But think about what's on the other side of the back. It's your stomach. It's the muscles that are there. If there's any pulled muscles in the abdomen, if there's any traumas to the organs, if there's a problem with the psoas muscle, the psoas muscle ties right into the low back. If that muscle is weak, your low back is weak. But that's an area that's not treated properly. Most people, when they're treating the back, will treat the back only, exclusively. They wouldn't even look at the front. I would look at the front. I would look at the side. I would look at the back. But I would also tie in the mental function of what's happening with that person independently, right? And that would be something that I would discuss with them. That would obviously be a private thing. They may not disclose this for public reasons, of course, because you know how social media is. But also those sort of things can have an influence and outcome on their earning contracts for the future, right?
So how come we don't typically see the practice that you have typically in sports at this point?
That's a good question. We have physiotherapists, massage therapists, lots of them that are around.
Every team, a whole bunch of them.
And apparently they're the best of the best, right? And in that, right, the type of training that each person goes through, what they get, what they decide to do after their formal training, That's something that each person decides to do themselves. So I can't speak for everybody else in terms of why they didn't do the training that they did or didn't do. But for me, what I decided to do was just learn more, and I blended Eastern medicine with Western medicine. I just don't know how many of the therapists out there are doing that to begin with, right? Do they integrate it into their practice? And if they do, how are they doing it? But ultimately, at the end of the day, what happens is that when anybody is working with an athlete, a client, you have to look at how much time, effort, money is going into the treatment, and what is the outcome? What is the results? Are you spending a lot of time and effort to get mediocre results? Or are you spending a little bit of time and getting fantastic results, right? So it really comes down to the skill set of the practitioner. Are they very competent at what they can do? The biggest thing is, and you'll hear this from athletes, you'll probably hear it from some of the people you interact with, it's the competency of the people that are managing or giving advice on therapy, their medical advice, and a lot of them probably internally don't feel confident with the information that they're given, okay? So look at a guy, I was just watching some stuff on YouTube, Kenyon Martin.
Mm-hmm.
He was talking about some injuries that he sustained in his career. One of the injuries that he had, microfractures in his knee. Now that's a huge problem. Okay, when you're looking at a sport like the NBA, if your knees aren't working, you're not going to last. Okay, but when he had the surgery, when he had the assessment from the doctor cleared him in 5 months to go back to play at a high level, right? Well, it didn't take long before he was out again because he was putting all his pressure on the other side.
And he was explosive.
He was quite a dominant guy, right? But again, what happens to a person when they suffer an injury? They don't have that same explosiveness, aggressiveness, because the confidence isn't there, right? That feedback mechanism that's going to your brain from your body, okay? It's not making you feel confident to do whatever it is that you want to do, okay? So when your brain is interpreting pain, signals, it's not going to have a lot of confidence to make that move or for you to do that athletic move that you need to do, okay? So in that, it's a two-way street. Your brain has to have the confidence with the signal coming back, right? And your brain has to have the confidence to be able to put it out there so your body can respond the way that it needs to.
So let's stay on an example like Kenyon Martin for a second. So
Okay.
the doctor who clears him, are you saying they clear him because they really don't understand what's going on with his knees?
Well, I can't speak to that as to why the doctor would have told him and cleared him, but I think the expectations from athletes is that they're getting paid, go out there and perform. So to the detriment of the athlete, they're in a situation where they're not doctors themselves, they're athletes. They need to live up to their contract expectations, their team expectations, the coach's expectations, their teammates' expectations, a lot of expectations. So if they're being cleared, they're assuming that that person has the best interest at heart for them. They work for the team. Okay? So in this, he's following advice, but in the process understands or feels 5 months later, he's in trouble. Right? So he ends up learning the hard way.
But you could also kind of reverse that and say, if you are that doctor working for the team and you're giving information that is to the detriment of the player, ultimately 5 months down the road, that would look bad on the doctor, though, wouldn't it?
Yes, you're right. But do they do that? Where does the blowback go to? It's the athlete, right? It's unfortunate circumstances, right? So in that, I don't think it ever goes back to the doctor, right? I don't think it goes back to the athletic therapist. I don't think it goes back to these guys. Now, maybe at the end of the year, they do an evaluation, the team, they decide that, okay, they want to keep this person on or off. We never hear about that. We never hear about who gets fired, who gets hired. You never hear about that. So maybe that doctor was unemployed after that season. I don't know, right? But I can tell you that the experience that the athletes have with some of the medical staff, sometimes I don't think that it's at the level they want it at, but because it's at their disposal and because they have use of it, they're reluctant to go out there to find out if there's other people that can do a better job or if there is better therapists that are out there.
So what sport do you believe would have the ideal athletes for you to work with?
So I can help any athlete. I can help any athlete at all. But if I was to choose my dream job and which athletes to work with, it would be the NBA. Easily.
The NBA, why?
Well, one, I love that sport.
You're a basketball guy.
I'm a basketball guy. I love it, right? And I've always had a fascination with basketball since I started watching it in the 80s. And I just got hooked on it. So I just love the sport, the athleticism, the competitiveness. And it's the greatest sport on earth, as far as I'm concerned, right? So if I was to pick my dream job, it would be to work with people that are in the NBA.
Have you suffered any injuries growing up? Or
I have. I had a meniscal tear in my knee, and that wasn't fun, but you can still function. You just can't do things like run properly the way that you want to. You still, the knee talks to you every once in a while.
Was that before or after you started in your profession?
Oh, way before.
Oh, way before.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, football injury back in the day. Yeah.
What did you learn in regards to like recovery?
Recovery can be difficult at times, but you need to have competent individuals that can do the job for you, which means that you have to have very specialized skill sets. But also understanding injuries, it's not easy to understand. There's so many different ways that you can address an injury. But the number one thing is that it takes time. And the person, whoever has the injury, has to put time into making sure they can look after it so that they can get the benefit out of it. But some people feel that the body will heal itself. They're half right. It can heal itself, but it needs help. If you don't have something to aid the process, how is it going to heal itself? We're not like Wolverine from the X-Men, right? So in that, if you have competent individuals that can deliver quality care, understands the body, I understand the bone system, the muscle system. I understand the neurological system, how the brain and the body works together, and how it has an impact on your mental health, okay, and how you feel spiritually as well, all right?
Talk to me about the impact in regards to the mental health, because that's probably a big thing there.
Mental health is, first of all, it's stigmatizing in terms of when someone is given that label of having mental health issues. That's unfair. That's unfair to anybody that's going through mental health issues. That's the first thing. So the primary thing that I find that is happening with people that are having struggles with mental health is that there's a short circuit that is happening in the brain. Okay? Very specifically, the frontal cortex, the limbic system. This is the emotional center. So what happens is that when the brain gets overloaded with emotions, okay, with experiences, what happens is that it starts to short circuit this part of the brain, and it gets too overwhelming, and it has an influence and impact on how the person feels. Okay? That's why when I do my work, I work on addressing the underlying factors that are causing the breakdowns, right? So we get into why is it happening? This person could be highly emotional, right? If they're highly emotional, that neurological circuit is short-circuiting continuously, okay? It becomes very overwhelming. When this happens, it gets to the point where it's unbearable for the person, and it can force that person, an athlete, into retirement. You just think about Andrew Luck, right? You think about
Can you use a therapist for that?
Well, you can, but I can very specifically tell you that I've worked with plenty of people where they've had issues with their emotions, and I was able to stabilize this short circuit so that it was happening less, and less until it wasn't happening anymore.
Stabilize. How do you do that?
Stabilize. Well, that's part of what it is that I do, right? So by understanding the cortical area that is causing the short circuit, what I do is we use this area as part of the treatment to improve that person's situation, right? We have to get into a little bit more of why the trigger is happening in the first place. Why are they short-circuiting? What is it that's constantly going through their mind, right? I'll give you an example. If you think about a traumatic experience happening, right? That traumatic experience could have happened years ago. So why is it still a problem today? The person is stuck experiencing it over and over and over in their mind. When this happens, that area starts to short circuit over and over and over. So this is why PTSD is a huge problem, right? People think, what's the big deal? It happened years ago, get over it. People also associate PTSD with war. You don't have to be in a war. You just have to have a bad experience, a traumatic experience, one that your brain has difficulty forgetting. Okay? So you have to remember now, when I work with the patient or the athlete, we're not changing any circumstances of what's happened in the past. But what happens sometimes is that their perception of the situation is real. So when it's real to them, it's like it's happening over and over. So we stem this from happening. And when this happens, it starts to stabilize the situation that they're experiencing over and over. So I've got a special way to get into this, and it's tapping into what is called the cell memory. The cell memory.
This is a lot, Paul.
I know.
This is a lot. But I got to ask you this because, and I mentioned, this isn't conventional.
No.
Right? So because it's not conventional, what challenges are you going to face when trying to implement this with a sports company, per se, right? Or a team, right? Because like you mentioned before, typically, they have their athletic therapists and all that kind of stuff. And you see the same thing over and over and over again, right? Mm-hmm. So they're looking for a certain thing when they're looking for a person to hire for the job, right? What challenges are you facing in regards to that?
Mm-hmm. So the first thing is that working for a team would be a lot of work. If you think about 15 people on a basketball team to look after, that's a lot of people. So one of the challenges was deciding who I would work with and when I would work with them. So we have a hotbed of basketball talent that's coming out of this province. You know this. It's massive now. It's just on fire all across Canada. The development, the leagues that are popping up. And in this, I decided that the best thing is for me to work with Canadian athletes, specifically. That the athletes are here. They're in our backyard. I'm from Vaughan. So this, actually, I grew up in Rexdale, so I'm giving a plug to Rexdale here.
Okay.
So, but I do live in Vaughan, and the athletes, when they come to Canada, when they come back home and they're here, they don't have those same support mechanisms that they do have on their teams, okay? Because they're here now. Their teams are in the USA, most of them. So in that, where's their support mechanism here? It's not following them. But when they're here, I'm here. So one of the challenges was figuring out who I was going to work with, and this is how I decided I was going to work with Canadian athletes very specifically. I also had to think about how I was going to deliver this. And so instead of having the athlete come to me, I'll go to the athlete because I already know that time constraints are an issue. So in terms of being able to provide my service to people that are already busy, have commitments and this sort of thing, that was one of the challenges. I had to figure out how I was going to do this. So I'll be going to where this athlete might be so that I can actually save them time and the effort of travel. So I'll show up there and we can do work that way. Now, one of the other things that's a challenge has to do with the fact that when I talk about the work that I do, the athlete experiences the change occur. But what you can't see is that neurological action potential going to the tissue. You cannot see the meridians that I speak of. The acupoints, you can't see them. It's conceptual in terms of what this is. It's non-conventional. So this is science, this is language that a lot of people are unfamiliar with. They don't understand it. They never heard of it. Chakras, energy centers. You hear about these in yoga, right? Energy travels through our bodies. How do you prove that energy exists within your body? Travels through these meridians, these acupoints. So there's a challenge for people to actually understand that this actually exists. So with this, it's something that is not for everybody because they will say, well, I don't believe in that. That's fine. But when you experience the change, when you feel the change, when you can tell that you feel different, that's the proof. So when I do work with my clients, I try to educate them as much as possible. Because if they understand their issues better, if they understand why the breakdowns are happening, if they understand why their injury keeps coming back over and over, right? Then I can tell them what I'm going to do. And when they see the outcome, the changes that occur, they get it.
So how long does it take you to kind of assess that?
I'm very good at assessing. And in that, I can do the assessments pretty quickly. But what I like to do is be pretty thorough about it. So I wouldn't rush myself through an assessment. What I'll do is I'll get the athlete or the client to walk. I'll get them to do normal things. I'll tell them, what do you have a challenge with? Show it to me. I want to see how you move. What'll happen is that when I start to see the body in motion, I can start to see where the breakdowns are occurring. I can see it. That makes me very proficient at being able to solve these problems that the athletes are going through, right? So the other thing that makes it work so well, it's all drug-free. So when you think about athletes, when you think about anybody that has to go through pain, go through an injury, go through recovery, and they don't want to use drugs. They don't want to use pain medications. They know what the side effects are. But also, they want to look for a different solution. The solution most people are looking for, anything that does not involve drugs. Everything that I do is drug-free.
So no painkillers, none of that stuff.
No, the painkiller has to do with how is the neurological dysfunctioning occurring? How do we find out where it's happening? So that's what happens in my assessment. I'm looking for these things. There's different ways to look at how the neurological function is happening or breaking down in the body at any given time. So when I do a screen test on a person, what I'm looking for is there a fault in the system, the neurological signaling from the brain to the body. When that breakdown occurs, that tells me I have to look into the situation. From there, based on how proficient I am at being a neuromuscular specialist, I can integrate the cortical contact points, the acupoints, the meridian system, use these as what will anchor and heal the patient's body. And they will feel it internally. They will feel it. Most people will feel it instantaneously. Some people that are not as open-minded will be skeptical about it. But in their skepticism, most times they just want to know how it works. Mike, if you're going on a plane and you're going on a holiday, you know that plane's up in the air. Do you need to know how to fly that plane to get to your destination?
No.
You just need to enjoy the ride, right?
Yeah.
And realize that you got there, right?
Right.
So if you got to your destination, are you going to question the pilot's ability?
No, just get me there.
Bingo. That's what I do. Okay? So when that person is going through their situation, they're being skeptical about it, but they feel the difference, right? They start to create their own block when they don't understand it. Some people get hung up on, if they don't understand it, they don't believe it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a challenge. So in that, if I have people that are open-minded, willing to understand or at least be educated on what it is that I have to offer, then we're already stepping in the right direction. But that allows for the healing process to occur. And if their mind is more open-minded, their body can heal.
What's been the toughest part of the job for you?
Well, probably that is just people understanding.
The understanding part.
Yeah, and that's where I do spend a lot of time on educating the individual on what's happening, because I feel that if they understand it, they can appreciate what it is that is in the information, and it also gives them a little bit more relief that there's not a lot of problems that are really happening. Sometimes they get hung up on, is it this? Is it that? Is something happening to me? So if you can put them at ease with just explaining things in a very simplistic nature, then what happens is that you can start to get them to just accept the idea that it's not that complex. Mm. But what is required is some patience on behalf of the athlete or the client. Because what happens is that it's an unlayering of problems that I'm trying to uncover, but also to correct, right? So if we have multiple problems that are happening within one individual, we have to try and peel those layers back one at a time. When that happens, the person feels different, they improve, they start to feel different. Until we get to the point when those layers are all stripped back, that person won't get to the destination we want them to get to. So it's a process to understand. We can't rush this process because as the signaling improves, the rest of the body starts to catch up with the signaling process. So it starts to become more efficient. But that's why I continue to work with the client. I'm looking to improve what they came to see me for, what their difficulty is, what their problem is. I continue to work on it until I find no breakdowns. Mm-hmm. When I see that there's no breakdowns, then we move on to either something else or we get to the end of what it is that we need to do.
If you had to look into the camera right now and give a pitch to athletes,
yes,
what would you say?
Okay. So I would say that what I have to offer is a very specialized service. The knowledge that I have is special knowledge. It has to do with understanding the neuromuscular system. So what I would like to do is to use my knowledge to help athletes, specifically NBA athletes, achieve their goals with what AMO has to offer.
You know, Paul, it seems so complex.
It is.
So complex, right? Because a lot of the time, you just hear people talk about the bodies, the doctors. We don't hear them speak much about the brain.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
And so when I think of it from that standpoint, it's intriguing. It's very interesting, right? Because everything does happen in the brain. And to me, that's what makes it so different, because you don't really think of it from that standpoint. Because when we look at players as a just the general fan, right? You look at players like robots, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how we look at them.
That's
we
right.
just do. We shouldn't, but we do.
That's right.
We do. And I don't know, that type of mindset. What do you think of that type of mindset from the general fan perspective? Because I don't think that'll ever change either. They just really, I don't think they understand how much these athletes have to go through in regards to their bodies breaking down. Like, these guys have to play on a day-to-day basis, even when they don't want to, Paul.
That's
even
true.
when they don't want to. So, I mean, on a scale from, well, how would I put this? How is the best way to ask this question? What does an athlete have to go through with their body compared to the average person?
Oh, wow. Well, that's pretty simple. You think about how long the athlete has been performing, and they've been performing from their teenage years, if not before that, right up to their adult years. So when you think about how much abuse their body has taken, how much stress, injuries, how many years they put themselves through, the grueling pace of travel. When you look at the pressure that they're under when it comes to expectations from the club, teammates, themselves, their peers, it's a lot. It's a lot of pressure. So I think it's unfair when a fan looks at an athlete and just expects them to perform. Like you said, they look at them like they're robots, that they're not human, actually, and they're all human.
Yeah.
Right. So in this, you have to remember it's for their entertainment, and when that player is gone, sometimes they go, move on to the next guy. They carry on, and they just don't realize that person's a human being. That person has a life. They've got a family, right? And beyond sport, they will suffer with these injuries still. You won't ever remember them as a fan and say, gee, I wonder how that guy's doing or how that girl is doing. You don't care about that. You just care about, selfishly, as a fan, your own entertainment.
Right? Yeah.
That's it. So to me, I look at that as a very unfair thing. Unfortunately, it comes with the territory, because once you put a price tag on how much that person is making, they look at it as, well, that just comes with the territory. You know, you earn your money, you got the problems too, so be it. So it's really unfair, but I think also as well, when they look at the athletes, with the things that they have to endure just in life, they have emotional issues, right? They have families that have problems. They have friends that they have to help out. These are things that you and I would also go through as well. But unfortunately, the average fan, doesn't give a crap.
No.
They don't care.
100%. Now, Paul, we're going to close this thing out.
Okay.
Now, before we get out of here, I'm going to ask you, first of all, where can we find you on social? How can we get in touch with you? I'll leave some links, too, so that people can find you immediately. But can we find you on social, website?
Yes. www.amosportsconsulting.com. And if you want to know if there's anything that I can do to help you, info@amosportsconsulting.com. Now, you have to type it in the URL bar. Okay? So you won't find it on Google search. And I did that intentionally for keeping a low profile. I don't have a social media profile other than LinkedIn. And that's done intentionally because I do keep a low profile for the reason that when I do work with the athletes, I want to keep a low profile for their sake. I've thought about this from the beginning in terms of, how I would be respecting the privacy of a lot of athletes. Coming onto your show, I'm getting myself out there for people to know who I am, but also at the same time, I'm not out there to exploit what it is that I do. Okay. It's going to be a privilege for me to work with the athletes. I've been thinking about it for years. I've come to the point now where I'm ready to make a splash in the industry.
So close us out once more, specifically with what you can do for people in the athlete.
with the specialized knowledge that I have and the neuromuscular expertise, what I want to do is to enable players, athletes to achieve the most by leveraging the power of AMO.
Okay. Appreciate you. Paul Kirpal.
Mike, thank you, man.
Appreciate you, bro.
I appreciate you.
Thank you, man. Keep doing your
Thank you.
thing, man.
I will.